Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. France is currently digesting the controversial recommendations made by President Emmanuel Macron. Essentially, the president is calling to combat Islamist separation here in France, the sense that a religion can separate a person from the lifestyle and values of the country. France, where church and state are separate by law. It began with church and state, now it's any religious place and state separate by law. But will Macron's words in Mulhouse, eastern France, really get to the heart of the matter? That's what we're discussing with our guests. Let's introduce them. Nassira Ghunnif is a sociologist and professor at Paris 8 University. Thank you very much for joining us. On the other side of the studio, they're not necessarily against you, understand. Nassir Ahmed Shahid, theologist, lecturer, and member of France Muslim Ahmadiyya community. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Joining us from afar, Julien Tolpin, who is a researcher at the CNRS and author of Communitarian. What is your book called, Julien? Tell me again.
Communitarism.
Thank you very much, sir. It was unclear to me, and nobody reminded me that you had a book. So thank you very much. We're pleased to say that you're the author of that, because it's extremely relevant. Before we let our guests loose, let's take a recap of what Emmanuel Macron had to say in Mulhouse, a report by Colin Kinnimborough.
He's declared it a priority for Act 2 of his presidential term. On Tuesday, Emmanuel Macron announced a series of measures aiming to combat what he called separatist Islamism, a tendency which he said was leading certain French citizens to hold religious laws above those of the Republic. Macron insisted, though, that the measures were not about stigmatizing any religion.
What we must put in place is not, as I have sometimes heard from some people, a plan against Islam. That would be a profound mistake. What we must fight is the separatism I've just described.
Central to Macron's plan is a move to restrict foreign countries' ability to send imams and teachers to France. He said Algeria, Morocco, and Turkey currently send 300 imams a year to France, a number that Macron plans to cut drastically, instead asking Muslim organizations to train more imams on French soil. He also said he would end the practice under which 9 countries send teachers to French schools to teach languages. Of those countries, only Turkey has so far rejected Macron's proposal. Finally, Macron said France would more closely track foreign financing of mosques, citing the example of a mosque project backed by Qatar in the eastern French city of Mulhouse, where he delivered his speech. Mulhouse is home to one of the 15 neighborhoods that the government has targeted as part of a coordinated anti-Islamist strategy, officially dubbed a Republican reconquest of sensitive areas.
A sense, perhaps, that the president, on the one level, was perhaps campaigning for the regional elections when making these announcements. On the other, perhaps looking at some genuine concerns that the French electorate has. Let's bring in our guests to talk about this, starting with Nassira. In terms of what you've heard recommended by President Macron, what's your kind of gut reaction? Do you think he's on the right lines?
No, I think he's playing some cards that are really dangerous. He's fanning the fire, as it has been the case so many times before. So I wouldn't say that what he said is drastically different from what we've heard from former presidents or prime ministers. And I would say that it's also quite timely for him to draw the attention to this, because it kind of plays as a decoy and as a distraction, because it's not only about the municipal elections, it's also about the turmoil and the opposition that he gets from French citizens. And this has been going on for more than a year. And at the time that the parliament is discussing a very controversial law about retirement and pensions, he draws to this very consensual question of Muslims and Islam in France that always gets the attention and prevents from really tackling the real issues, which are more economic, social, and a matter of bringing back some sort of a sense of dignity among the Muslims and among the wider French society. So I think that especially the word that he used that you could hardly translate into English.
Try it in French. We'll try and find a translation.
Séparatisme islamiste.
Separatism?
Islamist separatism?
Muslim isolation, I think, is possibly the best way to put it. This sense that someone, because of their religion and because of their community, feels completely detached from the
But
greater community around it.
Well, to put it in a different way, I would say that there is a sense of isolation coming from the Muslims, and especially veiled women, for example, who are Muslim in France, because they feel that they do not belong. And this is the gaze that they get from a lot of people in France, which make them feel that they are not equal, they are not welcome, and they're not supposed to claim their rights. So the isolation would also be something that comes from the wider society, instead of saying that it comes from those groups, those segments of the Muslim population.
So on one hand, it could be isolation. The other hand, it could be exclusion. Could be
Right,
the sense that
and
society doesn't want to include these people.
No, and I think that
Because they're
there's,
different.
of course, and there's something that is hardly addressed in the French public debate and this kind of stances by presidents, is the fact that Islam used to be a very effective tool in ruling colonial populations in the French Empire. And now it seems that Muslims are not under the colonial rule anymore. They are French citizens, and they claim their rights, and especially the right to appear in the public sphere with their beliefs and not be considered to be a threat to the French society. So there's a huge shift in the way Islam is considered, is living, is visible, and sometimes invisibilized, especially when it becomes part of the French society. And what Macron is playing, and the way he is paying lip service to real issues, is that he is trying to make sure that there is a difference between the good Muslims and the bad Islamists that want to separate from the society. But this is a stance that we've heard for the past 40 years. There's nothing new in what he's trying or pretending that he addresses. I think it's more of a decoy and a way to draw attention away from what he's failing to achieve right now in the wider French society.
And as you point out, Nassira, it's a very populist policy, and it sort of rings a lot of bells with a lot of people in a country which is leaning increasingly towards the hard right, dare we say far right, in terms of how it might vote. Let me just bring in Nassir for his take on the initial feeling about what President Macron had to say in Mulhouse. Do you feel, as Nassir was just saying, that in many respects he's kind of missed the point about what needs to be done?
I think when somebody says something, then we have to believe in good sense and hope that the good sense will prevail. Sometimes the politicians play political tricks. As I am not a politician, okay, but I hope better for France and the people. But if isolation means that there are some Muslim groups who remain within themselves and they are not playing their role, or their leaders sometimes they speak of certain things and which create a difference between the country where they live and their own ideas, or their previous countries of where they are born. I think Muslim also should play a role to with their tongue and with their actions. They are the part and parcel of this society. They are loyal to this country because Islam says, as I am a religious person, the Prophet of Islam said, the love of your country where you reside is a part of your faith. And then he says, it is true as a religious person, you follow Allah and His Messenger. But at the same time, the third word Quran used to obey your authority. Okay? Some Muslims say authority means within the Muslims. And that is the rift of the real spirit of Islamic teaching. In reality, anybody who is in authority, lawmaking, okay, then we should be loyal to the law of the land. If the politicians are playing tricks, I think it will not be good for the society in future. A real politician, according to me, is he who do whatever is necessary for the betterment of the all people without any discrimination. But the people also should be aware of their responsibilities. They are Muslim or they are Christian. Because Islam is always in media since so many times from different issues. And some Muslims also play a negative role or negative reaction. And because of that, all other peaceful Muslims, those who are playing positive role in the development of the society, they are also as labeled like that. You see? And I think those who came from outside, they are not from the French origin. They should understand that naturally the local people have some reservance, and through their action they should prove, okay, that they are loyal to the country, loyal to the state. They take benefit of it, and they do also whatever they can do for the development of the people following the law.
So if I get this right, then you're saying that Emmanuel Macron is correct in the sense that he wants Muslims to be loyal to France, to feel that attachment to France and feel French. Is he right to stop foreign imams coming in and teaching and preaching in mosques? Is he right to stop the teaching of certain foreign languages that are part of a reciprocity to reinforce community feeling, which is separate from France in many ways, but part of France at the same time? Is he right to stop the foreign funding of mosques, for instance? Is he right to do that?
If foreign funding it is not according to the law to come in, and the objective is that to create rift and radicalizations in any country, no foreign man should do it morally or according to the Islamic teaching. And then I think law should take its own way. But if the law allows something, then I think it should not be played as a political things, you see. But Imam, those who are here, they must speak French. They must know the culture or the law of the land. They must know the people of this land. And they must also preach to their people, the followers, those who come to their mosques, that what Islam says about the responsibility of the Muslim as a citizen of any country. You see, Quran is very clear. He says that Muslim are those who are for the benefit and good of the people.
Well, if I may add something to this, I'm quite surprised that we would still think Islam as something that is foreign, if not alien, to the French society.
It's the second largest religion in France, obviously.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, there are other reasons why the second language system should be discussed, and this has been. There has been a report like 35 years ago. It's about time that we realize that some intelligent people have thought this over.
There's really nothing new, is there, coming out, as you're saying? Really nothing new, is there?
No, and interestingly, what I noticed is that nobody would think that maybe imams could be French-born, could be home-born, could have lived all their life in France, be Muslims, feel good about being Muslims, and decide to become an imam. We are always thinking of this imam that comes from abroad, is not familiar with the French society. How come? I mean, there has been 3 generations, if not more, because Islam was part of the French Empire. This is to be recalled. And how come that after 3-4 generations, having French Muslims, we are still talking about bringing Muslim imams from abroad? I find that very quite puzzling, because it means that there is this sense of Islam is still something that is othered. There is this otherness of Islam that is always brought back to the fore, as if we could not consider that people who are our fellow citizens can be Muslim, practice their Islam, and why not want to become an imam? And I think that about the funding, the foreign funding, it's the same. How come that after 3 or 4 generations, and considering people who are Muslim or Arab, Black, Muslim, for any kind of origin, and have become successful, for example, and could be collectively funding mosques in France as French Muslims, how come nobody thinks about that? And we always think in terms the money has to come from abroad, from those suspicious countries.
I need to pause you both. I need to bring in our
Yeah,
third
of
guest
course.
because he might be getting cold feet waiting to come in and speak to us.
One word about
Julien Talpin, who's from the CNRS Research in Political Science. Julien, we've heard described here how to become a French citizen, for instance, you need to have certain loyalties toward France, speak French, have knowledge of the culture. That would apply to someone who happens to be Muslim and comes from abroad, as it might apply to someone like me who happens to be Roman Catholic and from the United Kingdom. Same issues there apply, don't they? So why does the president have to go to Mulhouse and make this statement, particularly aimed at Muslims?
I mean, I think the main reason is that, I mean, we historically, and Nasser mentioned it, since the colonization, we have created a problem with Islam and Muslims, and the French Republic is not treating Muslims and French citizens who have Muslim confession equally as other citizens. So the problem is not so much a foreign influence that would impede these Muslims to feel French, is the fact that they are regularly treated as different from others, and that they are experiencing on a regular basis unequal treatments and discrimination. And actually Macron yesterday mentioned discrimination, as he has been doing in the last years, discrimination as a potential root of the feeling of exclusion of many Muslims in the French society. The problem is that despite the discourses he has been making in the last years, focusing on discrimination, in terms of public policies, basically nothing is happening. So in many of the interviews I'm conducting with Muslims or people who have third generation French, there is clearly a feeling of not being treated as any other French. So there is something to be done here, but very few guidelines have been given by the president yesterday from this perspective, apart from a very general speech. So that's, I mean, one of the core problems, I think.
Julien Talpin, I need to stop you. Julien, I need to stop you because it's time for us to take a break. The sooner we go, the sooner we come back, and I'll bring you straight in then. Julien Talpin, thank you very much indeed. Part one's gone. Stay with us for part two of the France 24 debate. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. We're looking at Emmanuel Macron's pronouncements in Mulhouse in eastern France, where he was talking about combating the idea of Islamist separation, isolation, exclusion, a sense that religion separates a person from the actual greater community within the country. We've got guests to discuss this, and I'll introduce them to you straight away. Nassira Gurnef is sociologist and professor at Paris 8 University. Thank you for being with us. On the other side of our studio, Nasir Ahmed Shahid, theologist, lecturer, and member of France's Muslim Ahmadiyya community. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And the man I had to cut off at the end of part one, joining us from afar, Julien Talpin, CNRS researcher in political science. Julien, I'm sorry to have stopped you when you were on a roll. I will invite you to come back in and complete what you were saying. We were talking about Emmanuel Macron perhaps maybe missing the point about why certain people feel isolated in the communities they live in.
Yeah, I was about to mention, he has been focusing a lot on the foreign funding of Islam in France, but is giving a few elements about how we could fund differently Islam in the French context. I mean, to what extent the French state would be ready, for instance, to finance the building of mosques on its territory. Another issue is also the teaching of Arabic in public schools. I mean, there are a lot of public officials are complaining that children are actually learning Arabic in the mosque or in specific associations. But I mean, the actual potential for learning Arabic in public school is really limited, and there is a lot of opposition to that. So I mean, there is a really broad policies to be put in place to actually improve the conditions of the people that are targeted by the discourse of the president yesterday that haven't really been addressed, I think.
This issue of funding, I'll bring the question to all three of you. This issue of funding, I've read certain commentators of a fairly right-wing persuasion criticizing the fact that Saudi Arabia, for instance, gets involved. And that involves pushing a certain type of philosophy around Islam.
But it's all the French state responsibility. They are the ones who let this happen. I mean, when you think of the law of 1905 that separates the state from religion, and especially at that time it was Catholicism, when the law was implemented, they knew that there was one religion in France that was not served properly for its worshippers to express their beliefs. It was Protestants. And the state at that time funded new temples so that they would be in the same position in order to express their beliefs and have their own religious home. And interestingly, this is something that was raised around 2005, and there are historians that can prove this is how it happened. Why is it that the French state couldn't do the same thing for the Muslims, which is to provide them with decent places where they can worship, where they can gather, and where they are not isolated from the rest of the society, because then the state wouldn't be in the position to say, I am funding those places, those worship places, so that you can feel at home and not have to go to foreign funding.
That's the role that the state should be playing in many ways. But are you comfortable with, for instance, with Saudi Arabia funding mosques and paying for mosques? You're not comfortable with that. You're not comfortable with that, no.
I think, as she told, that if it was coming, then government must have known it. Okay, it should not let it come in. But the second point is what I am saying, and as a missionary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I can give you practical example. If there is one city, there are, for example, 1,000 Muslims. They want to worship. Why they cannot contribute to make mosque their own? Because if state come, one point is they say we are like, okay, we should not intervene, there is suppression. And I think the Muslims should be at such level that they should contribute and build the mosque. We, our Ahmadiyya community, we have 2 mosques. Our member contributed and did it. And we say that we don't want to be a burden on anybody. Not coming from outside, within the community, very fair finance system, and we are building our mosque, our missions and centers.
And that's, I suppose, how a community works, by everybody contributing, working together for the greater good to create a place that happens.
Not only the mosque. In our Saint-Prix commune, Mary, Mayor asked us, there is one very old church, okay, you can do for something. We did a march to collect the fund, and we give for the renovation of the church.
So that's renovating a church.
Yes, why not?
Which remains as a church for Christian worship.
Yes. Why not?
That's a great example.
I think, yeah, of course. But I think, this is something that happens and has been happening for a long time. I mean, Muslims in France have been contributing, have been part of the society, have been participating in so many different ways in the betterment for everybody. And every time we are drawn back to the fact that they are not doing enough, that they should be more integrated, it's always about, pointing at what is missing.
But who's doing the pointing? The people doing the pointing are white. They are people who fear people who are different. And is it essentially racism? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say that part of the colonial Islam that is still prevailing in France is that, of course, it fuels racism. You feel entitled to express the hatred, the Islamophobia against Muslims.
And then if that
France.
comes the other way around, it's regarded as the person who's not white being aggressive and being uppity and being...
And just by its presence.
It is a very, very, very dangerous combination.
The issue of the language, it should be dealt as a policy of the education system. There are so many languages from the college, from the lycée. Why not put Arabic? I think there will be no problem.
But what is interesting
this is also universal language,
it's the
international language.
It's the case Arabic is taught at the level of college and lycée. And interestingly, 20 years ago, I was heading a research group that dealt with so-called integration. And the question of Arabic, of those specific courses that were offered to young pupils, was raised. And what happened is that we realized that there was a double standard about Arabic, that it was a very prestigious language on the one hand, that would be taught at those high-profile lycées like Louis le Grand, Henri IV, where only the best pupils would go. And then you would have this kind of lower level of teaching Arabic. We have to get rid of that. And to begin with, there is a European charter that deals with recognizing minority languages, and France hasn't ratified this charter.
But in fact, if Islam is the second biggest religion in France, then are we almost not talking about a minority language? I know there's fewer people,
of course,
but
yeah.
it's obviously it's growing. The influence is there. I think we can show you a caption with the countries that are influencing France. If our producer can organise for that to appear for us, we can talk about these countries here. Countries sponsoring Islam in France. You see Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Morocco. They're popping up there, Algeria, Turkey. I mean, clearly there's an influence there. I mean, I think we've established that kind of influence that's alleged from Saudi Arabia isn't necessarily a good thing. But it is the problem that what Emmanuel Macron is doing is that he's pandering to racists. And let me put that question to Julien Tolpan from the CNRS. Julien, Macron perhaps pandering to racists in what he's saying?
I mean, clearly he has some electoral perspective, and obviously what he's preparing already is the presidential elections that will take place in 2 years, and he's already preparing the stage for his opposition to Marine Le Pen, and he wants to get its electorate and the voters. So there is something in the back of his mind, obviously, and he's also reflecting a lack of knowledge, I think, about Islam and the Muslim population that is very widespread in the French context. So obviously there is this racist background that is there and that we don't want to acknowledge. I mean, the very fact that in the French society we are not ready to accept the word Islamophobia, that is used pretty much everywhere in the world, just like in France in the last 5-6 years. Every other week we have a debate to know whether Islamophobia is a concept that is acceptable or not, rather than actually tackling the fact that Muslims are discriminated on a systemic basis, be it on the job market, at school, on the housing market. So, I mean, this is obviously a systemic problem, and the president is also only reflecting the fact that French society has a problem since a very long time with Islam. I want to be a little bit optimist here, and he was mentioning something that he hasn't done since he's been president. The fact that probably he should be supporting much more associations and NGOs, especially in poor neighborhoods that have been left behind. And I agree that in many ways, the situation would be easier for everybody, and in the first place, for the Muslim population, if they could self-organize more easily, be it in the mosques, but also outside, and if the civil society that is actually existing in many urban neighborhoods be recognized as a viable partner of the French state, which hasn't been the case so far. And just like Macron and his government has been cutting subsidies to many of these associations doing a lot of social and solidarity work in this neighborhood. So maybe is, finally realizing and acknowledging that there was something wrong here, and that more resources should be put and given to that type of actors.
Indeed, those kind of investments are really important to give people opportunities, young people, older people, everyone who needs an opportunity to improve where they live and how they live. Let's take a listen to President Macron talking about the fractures, as he sees it, within French society.
We must recognize that for several decades now, we've had a sense growing in our country, and not just a sense, but a reality. Certain fractures have emerged. There's a sense that the Republic has not always held its promises, and a part of our population that is separating itself from the rest, perhaps considering that, having long been forced to live behind walls, they would build their own. And they are doing so in the name of a religion, all while twisting its deepest aspirations, only to turn that religion into a political project. They do so in the name of Islam.
Just thinking about those countries we looked at that are influencing, bringing Islam into France and influence that way. Qatar, top of that list. Nobody picks on Qatar when they're pouring millions of euros into Paris Saint-Germain Football Club and investing in the football team. Right. So but that in a sense is bringing in a different kind of soft influence, isn't it, into what goes on?
Yeah, it's a soft power. We all know about that.
Be in sport, Paris Saint-Germain, that kind of thing. It's,
you know, owning all these kind of high-profile hotels all over Paris.
Of course. It's the money, yeah.
Who complains about that? I mean, some people do, you know, especially those that think that France should become white and
anybody who wants to complain on that line will complain about anything, won't they?
Yeah, right. But I think
Sorry, go ahead.
I think we have to see the root cause. To cut the branch will not be benefit. Not country, not even the people.
So the root cause would be?
When you say that this thing, the law and order agency, they know what is happening. Why not to stop? And that's why I think government also has his responsibility. If the people have also the responsibility. About the mosque, I want to say that I think it is not good the state should finance the mosque because tomorrow the believers who pray there, they will have the problem. Some people will say government is influencing us and pushing us to take a political decision for tomorrow's election, and some people will be against another problem in the mosque, and then the police will enter the mosque and they will shut the mosque.
So you're saying the mosque has to be separate?
I think the community of that area should build the mosque.
Okay.
Well,
not from outside, not from inside.
That's interesting because what you're describing, in case the state would fund at the beginning, as it did with the Protestants, you know, at the early 20th century, it means that the state cannot be trusted, which is quite a problem because I think that this is what's happening right now.
That's fundamentally what the problem is, isn't it?
It's a matter of distrust. But if you consider that the state is doing this for the betterment of the situation and the worshippers who are Muslims, then you don't think that they will influence. I don't hear about any Protestants in France being influenced, even back then, because the state wanted them to have the same state of worshipping as the Catholics, for example, who had churches, and the Protestants didn't have temples. Why would the state want to influence through this kind of funding? It would be like bringing them back to the common law.
To avoid the eventual problem, it is better.
Is there a fundamental issue here?
So far, you know, the influence is coming from states that are not really trustworthy.
Which brings us to my question, which would be about the fundamental issue which plays in many people's minds, is about rooting out radicalization, stopping this fermenting of terrorism in some people's minds. Now, you told me that the number of Muslims in France is 6 million?
Around 6
million. Around 6 million. I mean, the figures I've researched show that maximum 900 people got radicalized and went to Syria, for instance, which is a small fraction.
Right.
It doesn't say that every Muslim is about to do that.
Majority of people, Muslims,
but in some people's minds, they think
people.
that. But in some people's minds, they think that, and that's part of the tragedy, isn't it?
Small minority is doing, but I think there is some are playing a role. Sometimes the media, we are sitting in your studio, but still, I think sometimes
we can accept criticism. No problem.
It is done. Sometimes perhaps some politician also may be playing this. Okay, if you like the betterment of the society, I think we have to separate from an individual from his religion. When you say Islam, use the word Islam, that all those people who did not like radicalized or fanatic or terrorists, they will not say you are saying correct. When you will say certain A, B, C has done this thing and it is bad, we condemn it, but his religion is not this, I think you are creating an atmosphere in your society that you shall go very fast toward the peace.
And people turn to these desperate measures because they feel desperate about their lives. It's not about a religion, is it? It's about a lack of opportunity, a lack of a future. They look for excuses to.
Yeah, it has been described now and again. And interestingly, we are always downplaying the fact that there are social, economic, cultural, ideological situations that lead them to this kind of non-choice, to go to Syria, for example. And what we are not emphasizing is the fact that if the state had really taken seriously the presence of Muslims for like 40 or 50 years now, and considering them as equal citizens, then we would not be facing all the kind of structural racism, all the kind of discriminations that have created this kind of volatile and toxic climate that we are living in.
Let me just bring in Julien Talpin from the CNRS for what's probably a final comment. Julien, in terms of what we're seeing here, I'm going back to the radicalization idea about getting to the root of that, which I think is possibly the thing that Macron left unsaid, but it's certainly playing on the mind of a lot of voters. I think that he's trying to stop voting for more extreme parties. Is he getting to the root of that, do you think? Or is the root of stopping people turning to desperate measures to give them opportunities in life?
I mean, on the contrary, the very concept of Islamist separatism is in many ways just like putting in the same big bag people that are very different experiences. And between the 900 people who actually left for Syria and the millions of Muslims that are trying to live a normal life in France, there is very little in common. So, I mean, this very concept is problematic from this perspective. Then we can hope that the focus he has put on the fight against discrimination, the focus he has put in his speech also yesterday on the need to actually support solidarity networks in the poor and urban neighborhoods could actually go in the right direction. So that's, I mean, as Nassira was saying, I think just like the solution to all these problems we've been talking about tonight is to have a really to be at the level of the motto of the French Republic, which is equality, which hasn't been really the case in the last decades towards our Muslim citizens. So that's really the problem. And I think, I mean, in the last months in France, we had shots in front of a mosque. We had regular stigmatization on the media, and it's really hard now to be a Muslim in the French society. And I'm talking to a lot of friends and interviewees in my research, and Muslims are feeling really fed up with this climate. And I think we need to move forward, but the discourse of the president is not really helping from this perspective.
Julien, thank you very much indeed. Julien Talpin there from the CNRS, joining us from Roubaix, northern France. Nasser.
I think the social justice, or we can say absolute justice, that means on merit, without discrimination, we can help a lot. And there will be, I think, elevate also the society. And Muslims will think they are part of the parcel.
But is it a question of giving, young kids in rundown areas a chance, places to play, places to do things, education, give them the chance to learn?
This is the need of every citizen, every child.
Exactly,
yes.
I completely agree with you.
Yes.
But but we don't hear any talk about that, do we? We hear talk about sort of labelling people and labelling their religion.
What we don't hear is that the state is responsible for disrupting this kind of equal opportunity. The state is responsible for not taking action since the 80s about education, about housing, about employment, about health. It is not something that just happened because it's dysfunctional.
Completely agree.
You see, sometimes the petty crimes.
Sure.
I think when child is doing, it's very easy to stop him. He is afraid of the policeman. But when you let it go, tomorrow,
it snowballs. It gets further.
Well, I think we let go the state and not so much the child.
Indeed. Short pause. Media Watch is coming up straight away. I am convinced education is the key to what we were talking about, because I know where I grew up, unemployment was extremely high, but the chance to learn and get educated gave everyone a chance to do better. So I think go to school, learn things, that's the thing. Now there's someone who's going to teach us a few things. James Creedon here with Media Watch.
I'll try, Mark.
What have you found on our subject online?
OK, well, there was an image that got an awful lot of media attention, and this was when Emmanuel Macron began exchanging with this lady who was wearing the full veil. And you can see in the headline here that one of the things that he said during this encounter was political Islam.
She could be arrested for wearing that, couldn't she?
That's right.
The burqa
under a law in France, you're not allowed to cover your face. The full veil is illegal, and so essentially what Emmanuel Macron was saying, political Islam has no place in our country. It's part of the broader, I suppose, discussion. Now, there was a lot of cynicism online about that particular moment. Valeurs Actuelles, which is quite a reactionary magazine here in France, spoke about this photo that has caused a scandal. So just to show you some of the comments in that regard, who could believe that Macron, when he is speaking about separatist Islam, who can believe Macron when he speaks about separatist Islam when this lady comes along with the full veil? In other words, it discredits what he is saying.
What did they expect him to do? Arrest her or something?
Well, you see, some were kind of saying, such as this gentleman here, that could this have been somehow arranged? Was it a sort of a photo op?
Did it well have been, mightn't it?
But actually, there was quite a degree of cynicism about that, in the sense that the security around the president would often be extremely refined, of course.
I think according to my understanding of Islam and the hijab, this is not prescribed. You see only your eyes.
Right.
It is never written.
Well, I think I suppose it's a debatable point, but I think
if somebody does, I think for only 1,800 women who are doing this to make law.
And that's interesting. Among the 800s, that one would be right next to him.
Right.
That's a really interesting picture to take.
In any case, according to Valeurs Actuelles' reading of things, and I say, it is quite a reactionary magazine. They say that this covering would come under that law of I think it was in the year 2010 rather, that law came in. Now, that might be a debatable point, but others, just to say, were sharing the video saying that this wasn't a case of the woman being placed there as a kind of a prop, if you like, that indeed she seemed to kind of naturally approach him. And there is a sequence here on BFM television that is shared. In any case, at the moment when Emmanuel Macron, I suppose, came up against this lady wearing the full veil, a symbol, I suppose, of what Emmanuel Macron is trying to fight against, separatist Islam. It did generate a lot of discussion, Mark. A lot of people cynical about it, others not so much cynical about the moment, but about his response. Now, to kind of broaden that out a little bit, national television was covering, I suppose, this event, this walk and talk, in great detail. Arrêt sur Image, which is a sort of a media analysis website here in France.
Indeed.
They said, look, when public television comes along and, does an exercise such as this, really what they're doing is they're playing into what the powers that be are looking for. It's sort of, they're acting as an extension, a PR, if you like, for the power politics. I suppose you could argue about that. Anyway, so that was kind of one of the key media moments. What happened in any case yesterday in Mulhouse also got a lot of coverage in the international press. But I think pretty quickly people felt that this was looking towards the local elections, the municipal elections. And you can see here, this is essentially how the Financial Times summed it up, an attempt to elicit support from right-wing voters ahead of French local elections. So even if it's a very real issue in terms of how French society is structured, a lot of people, journalists kind of pointing to perhaps a degree of cynical politics going on as well. Perhaps a bit of both.
Everything is political when you're a politician, James. I think that's what it boils down to, doesn't it?
That's
James
right.
Creedon, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our guest, Nasira Gunnar from Paris University. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Nasir Ahmed Shahid of the French Muslim Ahmadiyya community. I'm proud that I got that correctly pronounced. And thank you to Julien Talpin from CNRS joining us from Roubaix earlier on. Stay with us, more to come here. Live from Paris, France 24.